The wind screamed across the frozen plains like 1,000 angry spirits. Snow whipped against the small wooden hut, rattling its shutters and piling in white dunes along the walls. Inside, Marcus sat by the fire, his hands stretched toward the flames. The storm outside had been growing since morning, and by nightfall it had become a full blizzard. Marcus was no stranger to storms. He had lived alone on this frontier world for nearly 2 years, farming a small patch of land in the warmer months and surviving the brutal winters in his hut. Still, even he felt uneasy at the sound of the wind tonight. The wooden walls creaked as if they might give way at any moment. He poked the fire with an iron rod, sending sparks flying up the chimney. The warmth helped, but he could still see his breath in the air. This planet area was colder than Earth had ever been in his memory. He sometimes wondered why humans had chosen to settle here at all. But then again, Earth was far away, crowded and hungry. Out here, at least, there was space to live, even if the price was solitude. As Marcus settled back in his chair, a sharp noise broke through the howling storm. It was faint at first, almost hidden by the wind, but his ears caught it. A thump followed by another, and then the unmistakable creak of the door latch. He froze. No one should be out there in this weather. No one should even be near his hut. The latch rattled again, and then with a forceful shove the door burst open. A blast of snow-laden wind roared inside, snuffing out the warmth of the fire. Marcus leapt to his feet, grabbing the old hunting spear that leaned against the wall. Through the swirling snow, a figure stumbled in, small, cloaked in furs and shivering violently. The stranger collapsed onto the floor just inside the doorway. For a moment, Marcus only saw a mound of white-coated cloth and tangled hair. Then the stranger lifted their head, and he realized with shock, it was not a human. The face that looked up at him was sharp and delicate, with skin that shimmered faintly in the firelight like pale crystal. Her eyes were large and icy silver that caught every flicker of the flame. She was young, though not a child, and clearly exhausted. But when her gaze locked on him, on the broad-shouldered, bearded human standing with a spear in his hand, her expression twisted in terror. She scrambled back against the wall, breathing hard, clutching her fur cloak around herself as if it were armor. Words tumbled from her lips in a language Marcus did not fully understand, sharp and fast like shards of ice. Her voice trembled with fear. Marcus lowered the spear at once. "Wait, I'm not going to hurt you," he said, speaking slowly, his voice calm. He set the weapon back against the wall, but the alien woman only pressed herself tighter against the wooden boards, her eyes wide. She looked like a trapped animal, cornered and desperate. Marcus raised both hands, palms open, trying to show he meant no harm. "It's all right. You're safe here. The storm..." He gestured to the window where snow still pounded against the glass. "You'll freeze if you go back out." She shook her head violently, whispering something over and over. He could not make out the words, but the tone was clear. Fear. Marcus sighed and stepped back, giving her space. He returned to the fireplace where the flame still flickered weakly. He added more wood, coaxing the fire back to life. Slowly, the warmth began to spread again. For several minutes, the woman stayed pressed against the wall, her breath sharp and quick. Marcus pretended not to watch her, focusing instead on the fire. He knew enough about wild animals to understand. If you stared too directly, you only made them feel threatened. Maybe the same rule applied to her. Finally, when her shaking grew too strong to hide, she inched closer to the fire. She kept her eyes on him the whole time, moving cautiously as if expecting him to strike at any moment. Marcus said nothing, only pushed a clay mug toward her. "Drink," he offered softly. The mug was filled with hot broth, the only food he had prepared for the night. She hesitated, then reached out with trembling hands. The moment her fingers brushed the mug, she flinched back as though the simple kindness were a trick. But her hunger and exhaustion won. Slowly, she lifted the cup to her lips and sipped. Marcus watched her shoulders relax just a little. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes still darted toward him with suspicion, but the raw panic in them began to fade. At last, she whispered a single word, her voice rough from the cold. "Human," Marcus nodded. "Yes, human." She flinched again, the word filled with fear in her mouth. He realized then what the problem was. Among her people, humans were not just strangers, they were monsters. He had heard rumors before, whispered stories of how the local tribes spoke of settlers as cruel invaders who destroyed everything they touched. No wonder she was terrified, but Marcus knew he was only one man, alone, trying to survive. He had no war with her people, All he had was a hut, a fire, and a desire to keep breathing. "Name?" Marcus asked, pointing at her. She frowned, not understanding at first. Then he tapped his chest. "Marcus." She blinked, hesitated, then placed her hand lightly against her own chest. "Liara." The name was soft, almost musical. "Liara." Marcus gave a small nod of respect. "Liara," he repeated carefully. For the first time, her silver eyes softened just a little. She still did not trust him, but now at least she saw him as something more than a threat. Outside, the blizzard roared on, hammering the little hut with all its fury. Inside, two strangers sat by the fire. One human, one alien, bound together by storm and circumstance. Neither knew what would happen once the snow cleared. But for this night, survival forced them into the same fragile shelter. And though Liara's heart still raced with fear, she could not deny the truth. Without the human's fire, she would already be dead. The storm did not weaken when the sun rose. Instead, it grew stronger, hammering the hut with sheets of white snow that covered everything outside. The world beyond the wooden walls had disappeared into a blinding sea of frost. Inside, Marcus woke to the sound of the roof groaning beneath the weight. He quickly shoveled snow off with a long pole through the trapdoor in the ceiling, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Liara watched him silently from her corner near the fire. She had not slept much. Every sound had made her flinch. The crack of wood in the fire, the shifting of snow, even Marcus's footsteps. Though her body had warmed, her fear had not left. She kept her cloak wrapped tightly around herself, her silver eyes following his every move. Marcus returned inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. He glanced at her, trying to read her thoughts, but her face was guarded. He sighed and set down the pole. "You can stay here until the storm passes," he said slowly, knowing she would understand only part of it. "No harm." He pointed to himself, then to her, then spread his hands in a gesture of peace. Liara narrowed her eyes. She seemed to understand his meaning, but trust did not come easily. Her people had taught her to fear humans. They were destroyers, she had been told, greedy and merciless. Yet this man had given her fire and food instead of chains. She touched her chest lightly. "Liara," she whispered again, as if to remind him she was not just a stranger. Marcus smiled faintly. "Liara," he repeated. Then he tapped his chest. Marcus. For a long time, neither spoke. The storm filled the silence with its endless howling. Finally, Marcus prepared a simple meal. He had dried root vegetables and salted meat, preserved from his harvest. He boiled them together in a pot, filling the hut with a warm, earthy smell. Liara's nose twitched, and despite herself, she leaned closer. When he handed her a bowl, she hesitated. She stared at it suspiciously, as though expecting poison. Marcus took a spoonful from his own bowl first, chewing slowly, then nodded toward hers. Cautiously, she lifted the spoon and tasted. Her eyes widened slightly at the warmth spreading through her body. She ate slowly at first, then with more hunger, though her gaze never left Marcus. "You don't trust me," Marcus said softly. He wasn't angry. His tone was calm, almost understanding. "That's all right." She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but something in his gentle tone made her relax. Just a little. After the meal, Marcus pulled out a small bundle of cloth. Inside were simple tools, a knife, a whetstone, a piece of carved wood. He sat by the fire and began to work, shaping the wood into a spoon. His hands moved with steady patience. Liara watched, curiosity flickering behind her guarded expression. She had seen human tools before, but never this close, never in the hands of someone working with quiet focus. At last, her curiosity overcame her fear. She pointed at the carving knife, then at the spoon. "Human work?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Marcus looked up in surprise, then nodded. "Yes, work." He handed her the spoon. She turned it over in her hands, studying the smooth surface. For a moment, her silver eyes softened. She whispered something in her own language, a word Marcus could not understand but could guess. "Beautiful." That was the first time the tension in the hut eased. Hours passed. The storm raged on without mercy, trapping them together. With no work to do outside, Marcus tried again to build a bridge of words. He pointed at objects and named them slowly. Fire, wood, water, food. Liara listened carefully, repeating each word with her soft accent. Sometimes she laughed quietly at her mistakes, covering her mouth quickly as if ashamed of the sound. Marcus smiled each time, encouraging her. In return, she began to teach him words from her own tongue. She pointed to the fire. Zera. She pointed to the hut's wall. Rel. She tapped her chest. Liara. Marcus repeated clumsily, making her laugh again. Piece by piece. The two strangers began to understand each other. That evening, when the storm showed no sign of stopping, Marcus set extra logs on the fire. Liara sat beside it, her cloak open now, the silver shimmer of her skin glowing faintly in the light. She looked less like a frightened animal, and more like a young woman finally catching her breath. Marcus poured 2 cups of warm tea from dried herbs he had gathered months ago. He handed one to her. She accepted without hesitation this time. Why? Here, Marcus asked slowly, pointing outside, then at her. Why come, Storm? Liara lowered her eyes. For a long moment she did not answer. Then in halting words she tried. Run from camp. Run far, Storm come, no. Choice, Marcus frowned. Run from your people? She nodded once, her face tightening with pain. She said a string of words in her own language, too fast for Marcus to catch. But her eyes told the story. Fear, anger, sorrow. He wanted to ask more, but he knew pushing too hard would break the fragile trust forming between them. Instead, he nodded. Safe here, he said firmly. Storm pass, you safe. Liara looked at him then, really looked at him as if trying to see whether his words were truth. For the first time, she did not seem to find a monster. She saw a man who lived alone, who kept a fire burning, who offered warmth instead of chains. Slowly, she whispered, Safe. Night fell again. The second night of the blizzard. The hut was warm, but outside the storm screamed endlessly. Marcus lay on his simple bed of furs while Liara remained near the fire. Both stayed awake longer than they should have, listening to the storm's fury. At last, Marcus spoke softly. Not enemy. He pointed at himself, then shook his head. Not enemy. Liara's eyes glimmered in the firelight. She hesitated, then replied in her own broken words. Human. Not all enemy. Maybe. It was not full trust, but it was more than nothing. And for Marcus, who had lived in silence for so long, that small thread of understanding felt like the beginning of something larger. 2 strangers, trapped in a storm, had begun to bridge the distance of fear. Neither knew what would happen when the snow cleared, but for now, in the fragile warmth of a wooden hut, a human and an alien had shared fire, food, and the first fragile words of trust. The blizzard finally began to weaken after 2 long days. The wind still howled, but the heavy sheets of snow had slowed, and now the storm outside sounded more tired than furious. Light filtered weakly through the frost-coated window, turning the hut into a dim, icy glow. Marcus rose early, as was his habit, and began checking the supplies. The woodpile inside the hut was nearly gone, and the food was low too. If the storm had lasted another day, he and Liara would have been in trouble. Liara was awake as well, sitting close to the fire with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her silver eyes followed Marcus as he moved around the small room. She seemed calmer than before, but not completely at ease. Trust, Marcus knew, was a slow thing. He pulled on his heavy coat and boots. I need to get more wood, he said, pointing toward the door, then at the fire. Liara frowned as if trying to understand. Then she nodded slightly. Wood fire, Marcus smiled. Good. When he opened the door, the cold struck like a wall. Snow had piled high against the hut, but at least the sky was brighter now. He pushed his way through, chopping enough logs to last several more days, while Liara remained inside, watching from the window like a cautious bird. By the time Marcus returned, his beard was thick with frost. He shook off the snow and added more logs to the fire. The warmth filled the hut again, and he sighed in relief. Liara spoke quietly. Human strong Storm. Not kill? Marcus gave a short laugh. Storm tried. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, the first real smile he had seen from her. But then her expression turned serious again. She stared into the flames, her face shadowed with thought. For a long time she said nothing. Finally she whispered, almost to herself. Danger, not Storm, danger. My people. Marcus froze. He looked at her carefully. Your people? She nodded, her eyes distant. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully, as if debating whether to tell him more. Her hands twisted the edge of her cloak, her body tense. Marcus sat across from her, waiting. He did not push. He knew that if he tried to force her words, she would retreat again into fear. At last, Liara lifted her gaze. Her voice was soft but steady. "Not Wanderer. Not alone, I am—" She hesitated, then tapped her chest. "Daughter. Leader's daughter." Marcus blinked. "Leader's daughter? You mean a princess?" Liara's lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded once. The words sank into Marcus like a stone. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. Of all the things he had expected, this was not one of them. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you are the daughter of the tribe leader?" "Yes," she confirmed. Her voice shook, but her eyes held his. Liara, daughter of Kael Rin. Marcus had heard the name before. Kael Rin was the chief of one of the largest alien tribes in this region. A fierce leader, known for his hatred of humans, Marcus had kept his distance from the tribe, avoiding any paths that might cross theirs. Now one of Kael Rin's daughters was sitting in his hut. "Why here?" Marcus asked carefully. "Why leave your tribe?" Liara's hands tightened on her cloak. She looked away, struggling for words. "Father, want me marry. Alliance to strong man, not love. Not choice, only cage." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Marcus felt a sharp ache in his chest. He understood cages. Not of wood or iron, but of duty, of expectation. He had left Earth for the same reason. Too many rules, too many voices telling him what to do. Out here in the wild silence, he had found freedom. "You ran," he said quietly. Liara nodded, her silver eyes glistening. "Run far, Storm." "Catch me, then, you?" She looked at him then, her gaze heavy with meaning. "If people find me here, they say you steal me." "They kill," Marcus exhaled slowly. The danger was suddenly clear. If Kael Rin's hunters came searching and found Liara in his hut, they would not listen to reason. They would see a human keeping their leader's daughter. To them it would be proof of every dark story told about humans. And Marcus would be dead before he could explain. Liara must have read the fear in his eyes because she lowered her head. "I bring danger to you. I should—" "Go." Marcus shook his head sharply. "No, you step outside now, you die. Storm's still strong. And even if Storm not kill you, hunters will. They'll find your trail." She flinched at his words but said nothing. For a while silence filled the hut again. The fire crackled and the storm groaned outside. Marcus stared into the flames, his thoughts heavy. He had not asked for this. All he had wanted was to live in peace, far from the conflicts of men and aliens alike. Now fate had dropped a frightened princess into his home. Finally he looked at her. "You are safe here. I will not give you away. But you must know, if your people come, it will not be easy." Liara met his gaze. For the first time there was no fear in her eyes, only gratitude. "You help me. Though danger?" Marcus shrugged, trying to act casual. "You needed help." "That's reason enough." Her eyes softened. Slowly she reached out and touched the carved wooden spoon he had given her the day before. She held it gently, as though it were more than wood, as though it were proof that kindness still existed. "Human Marcus," she said quietly. "Not monster, not enemy. Friend." The word friend struck him harder than he expected. It had been a long time since anyone had called him that. Outside, the storm finally began to calm, but inside the hut, a different storm had been born, one of choices, danger, and secrets. Marcus now knew that the woman in his care was no ordinary wanderer, but a princess hunted by her own people. And though every part of his mind told him to send her away, his heart had already chosen. He would not abandon her, not to the storm and not to the hunters who would surely come. That night, as Liara slept by the fire, Marcus sat awake, his spear resting across his knees. The wind had quieted, but his thoughts churned. He knew the days ahead would test him in ways he had never faced before. But one thing was certain: he would stand by the alien woman who had fled into his hut. Whatever came next, he would not let her face it alone. The storm finally broke. After 3 days of blinding snow and howling winds, the world outside the hut grew quiet. When Marcus pushed open the heavy wooden door, the brightness nearly blinded him. The land stretched in every direction, buried under deep white drifts. The sky was a pale blue and sunlight sparkled on the frozen plains. Marcus stepped out carefully, his boots crunching in the snow. The silence was so sharp it almost hurt his ears. For a moment, it felt as if the storm had erased all life from the world. But he knew better. The silence of snow could hide many things: tracks, movement, even enemies. Inside, Liara stood at the doorway, watching him. Her silver eyes scanned the endless snow with unease. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Marcus turned back to her. "Clear sky," he said, pointing upward. "Storm gone." She nodded, though her expression did not soften. Instead, she whispered, "Storm gone. Danger comes." Marcus frowned. "Hunters?" Liara nodded once, her lips pressed tight. They did not have to wait long. By midday, Marcus spotted dark shapes moving across the horizon. At first, they looked like shadows against the snow, but as they drew nearer, he saw their true forms. Tall figures cloaked in furs, carrying long spears tipped with stone and crystal. Their movements were swift and practiced, their silver eyes gleaming in the sun. Liara's people. Marcus's grip tightened on his own spear. He counted 6 hunters moving in a fan-shaped pattern, their boots sinking deep into the snow. They were searching, scanning every drift for signs of their lost princess. Liara's breath grew fast. "They find me," she whispered. "They see human. They kill." Marcus looked at her sharply. "Then we make sure they don't." But Liara shook her head. "No, if I hide, they say you steal me. If I speak truth, maybe they listen." Her words wavered, full of doubt. Marcus studied her face. She was terrified, but there was strength in her too. She was no longer the trembling woman who had first stumbled into his hut. She was preparing to face her people no matter the cost. "Then we face them together," Marcus said firmly. The hunters reached the hut by afternoon. They surrounded it in silence, their spears lowered. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, stepped forward. His voice was harsh, his words sharp in Liara's tongue. Liara stepped outside, her cloak fluttering in the cold wind. Her heart pounded, but she lifted her chin high. She answered in her own language, her voice strong despite the fear in her chest. Marcus could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. She was declaring something, defending him perhaps. The leader's eyes narrowed. His gaze flicked to Marcus, and the hatred in that look was clear. He barked another command. The other hunters tightened their circle. Marcus gripped his spear, ready for a fight. He could feel the tension in the air, like a rope pulled too tight. One wrong move and it would snap. Liara raised her hands. She shouted something sharp and commanding. The hunters hesitated. For a moment, silence fell again, broken only by the wind brushing across the snow. Then the ground shook. At first, Marcus thought it was just the snow shifting, but then a low growl echoed from beneath the drifts. A massive shadow moved under the white surface, circling the group. Liara's eyes widened. "Snow beast," she whispered in fear. The hunters immediately shifted formation, their spears raised. They shouted warnings to one another, their silver eyes scanning the snow. Suddenly, the beast burst from the ground in a spray of snow and ice. It was enormous, its body covered in thick white fur, its jaws lined with rows of sharp teeth. 4 long claws dug into the snow as it roared, shaking the air. The hunters braced themselves, but the creature lunged before they could strike. One hunter was knocked aside, his spear shattering as the beast's claws slashed the ground. Marcus didn't hesitate. He ran forward, his spear gripped tightly. He thrust it into the creature's side, the sharp point sinking deep into its fur. The beast roared in pain, twisting toward him. "Marcus!" Liara cried. The hunters joined the fight, striking with their crystal-tipped weapons. The beast swung its massive body, sending 2 of them sprawling into the snow. Marcus ducked beneath its claws, jabbing his spear again. He felt the wood shudder in his hands as the point struck bone. The beast howled, snapping its jaws dangerously close to his head. One hunter hurled a spear into the beast's neck. Another slashed at its legs. Still, the creature fought fiercely, refusing to fall. Liara grabbed a fallen spear and rushed forward. Her hands shook, but her aim was true. She drove the weapon into the beast's shoulder, her silver eyes blazing with determination. Together, human and alien, they pressed the attack. At last, with a final roar, the beast staggered and collapsed, its massive body sinking into the snow. Steam rose from its wounds, mingling with the frosty air. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hunter's ragged breathing. For a long moment, no one moved. The hunters stood panting, their spears still raised. Marcus lowered his weapon slowly, his chest heaving. Snow clung to his beard and sweat dripped from his brow despite the cold. Liara stood beside him, gripping the spear with trembling hands. She was pale, but her eyes shone with fire. She looked at Marcus, and he gave her a short nod. The hunter's leader finally stepped forward. His gaze flicked from the dead beast to Marcus, then to Liara. He spoke again in their language, his tone less sharp this time. Liara answered, her voice steady. She pointed at Marcus, then at the beast's body. Her words carried weight as though she were declaring his bravery. The hunters exchanged uncertain glances. The hatred in their eyes had softened, replaced by something closer to respect, or at least hesitation. The leader grunted, then gave a short nod. He gestured to his hunters, who began gathering the beast's claws and fur as trophies. Marcus stood silently, unsure of what had just passed between them. But when Liara turned to him, her face told him everything. For the first time, her people had seen a human fight not as an enemy, but as an ally. As the hunters prepared to leave, Liara's gaze lingered on Marcus. She had defended him before her people, and he had stood beside her against the snow beast. The bond between them was no longer fragile, it was strong, forged in danger and fire. But Marcus knew the danger was not gone. The hunters had not attacked him, but they had not fully accepted him either. Suspicion still lingered in their eyes. As the sun dipped low over the snowy horizon, Marcus and Liara returned to the hut. The hunters vanished into the distance, their dark figures fading into the white plains. Inside by the fire, Liara finally spoke. Her voice was soft but certain. They saw. Human, not monster. Human fight, like us. Marcus sat heavily in his chair, exhausted. He managed a faint smile. Maybe that's enough. Liara looked at him then, her silver eyes glowing in the firelight. For the first time, she felt no fear in his presence. Instead, she felt something new. Hope. Word count. 1600, balanced with action, dialogue, and emotional beats. This part shows the first contact with Liara's tribe, a fight against a snow beast, and how Marcus begins to earn respect by proving humanity's strength and courage. The storm had passed, leaving the frozen world bright and quiet. Snow glittered in the sunlight, sparkling like millions of tiny diamonds across the plains. The air was crisp and cold but peaceful. Marcus stepped outside his hut, taking a deep breath. For the first time in days, he felt a calm settle over the land. Liara emerged behind him, her silver eyes scanning the horizon. Her cloak was dusted with frost, and her breath formed small clouds in the cold air. She stood still, gazing at the snow-covered world around them. Marcus glanced at her. "It's quiet now," he said softly. "The storm, the danger, gone." Liara nodded slowly. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice low but steady. "Hunters gone, they see. Human, not enemy. But I cannot return. Not now." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Not return? To your tribe?" She shook her head. "No, I choose freedom, choose stay." Her words were simple, but the meaning was clear. She was choosing him. Choosing the life she could have instead of the one her father had planned. Marcus felt a mixture of surprise and relief. He had expected gratitude, perhaps caution, but not this declaration. Still, he did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied her face, searching for any hint of doubt. There was none. She had made her decision. You mean stay here?" he asked slowly. Liara nodded. "With you. Hut safe, fire warm, you. Friend, I want to stay." Marcus felt a warmth in his chest. After so many years of isolation, someone had chosen to stay with him. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He nodded, finally allowing himself a small smile. "Then you stay," he said. "We survive together. You safe." The following days passed in a rhythm of quiet labor and companionship. Marcus showed Liara how to maintain the hut, chop wood, and store food for the coming winter. She was a quick learner, her hands careful but strong. She even began to help him with the small garden he had planted near the hut. In return, Liara taught Marcus the ways of her people. She showed him how to read the tracks in the snow, how to sense approaching storms, and even a few simple survival techniques that her tribe had passed down through generations. Marcus listened and practiced, his respect for her growing every day. Despite the peaceful routine, Marcus knew that danger could return at any moment. Kael'rin's hunters had not fully accepted him, and the tribe would likely search for Liara again. But he was no longer afraid. Together they could face anything. One afternoon, as the pale sun dipped low over the snow, Liara turned to Marcus. "We explore?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Explore?" She nodded. "Land beyond. Mountains. Forests. Life. Different from tribe." He chuckled softly. I thought you might like that. He stood, brushing snow from his coat. Then we explore. But first we prepare. Long journey. They packed supplies over the next few days, storing food, water, and warm furs. Marcus taught Liara how to carry heavy loads, how to find fresh water beneath frozen lakes, and how to mark safe paths through the snow. She learned quickly, her agility and sharp senses making her a skilled companion. By the time they were ready, the world outside the hut seemed transformed. The blizzard had left the land pristine, untouched yet full of opportunity. Their first journey was cautious. Marcus led the way, Liara following closely. Together they navigated snowdrifts, frozen streams, and icy cliffs. She pointed out subtle signs in the snow, tracks of small animals, areas where the ice was thin, and even hidden caves that could serve as shelter. Marcus marveled at her knowledge. She was no ordinary wanderer. She was a true daughter of her people, trained in survival, leadership, and observation, and now she shared that knowledge with him. At night, they camped under the stars, a small fire burning between them. The world was vast, and yet in that small circle of warmth, they felt safe. Liara leaned back against Marcus, her cloak around both of them, and for the first time she felt at home. Home, she whispered, her silver eyes reflecting the firelight. Marcus smiled. Yes, a home. It was a simple word, but heavy with meaning. Neither of them had a home like this before. Alone, shared, protected, and chosen. As days turned into weeks, Marcus and Liara continued their exploration. They discovered frozen rivers teeming with small hardy fish. They climbed hills that overlooked forests of frost-coated trees. They even found a small herd of grazing creatures, their thick fur keeping them alive in the harsh cold. Through it all, their bond grew stronger. They learned each other's strengths, relied on each other's instincts, and shared laughter and stories around the fire at night. Liara taught Marcus words from her language, phrases that carried emotion and history. Marcus taught Liara Earth words, simple, strong, full of human feeling. Together, they created a small bridge between worlds, a human and an alien learning from each other, living side by side. One evening, as the sun sank low, Marcus looked at Liara and said, "Storms come. Hunters maybe come too, but we—" Faced together. Liara nodded, a soft smile touching her lips. Yes, together, always. The words were more than promise. They were a bond forged in fire, snow, and danger. They had survived blizzards, fear, and beasts. Now, they would face whatever came next together. Marcus reached out and took her hand. It was small and delicate, yet strong in its own way. Liara's fingers intertwined with his. For a moment, they simply stood there, watching the golden sunlight dance on the snow, feeling the quiet peace that came after storms. The world was still dangerous. Kael'rin's tribe might return. The mountains might hide new threats. But here in this small hut and in the land they had begun to explore, they had something worth protecting. Trust, friendship, and hope. And that was enough. The final morning came quietly. Marcus and Liara stood at the edge of a frozen cliff looking out over the land. Snow stretched for miles, broken only by forests and rivers sparkling in the sunlight. This world, Liara whispered. Beautiful, free, Marcus nodded. And it's ours to see, to live. Liara smiled, a bright, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She turned to Marcus. Thank you. For fire, for safety, for life. Marcus shrugged, pretending to be casual, though his heart felt full. No need to thank me. We survived together. That's enough. She stepped closer, and for the first time there was no fear in her gaze. Only trust, respect, and something deeper, friendship, perhaps even more. Marcus looked at her, feeling the same. The world was harsh, cold, and dangerous. But together, they were stronger than any storm, any threat, any hunter that might come. Liara glanced back at the hut, the small wooden home that had sheltered them through the worst blizzard she had ever faced. Then she looked forward at the vast white world stretching endlessly before them. This is beginning, she said softly. Marcus nodded. Yes, beginning. They turned toward the trail ahead, stepping forward into the snow. Side by side, human and alien, they walked into the vast open world, free, unafraid, and together. The wind whispered around them, carrying no threat now, only the promise of adventure, survival, and hope. And for the first time in a long time, both felt truly alive.